October 20, 2011 to October 20, 2022 made exactly 11 years since the overthrow and death of one of Africa's icon Muammar Gaddafi of Libya. Since his overthrow, it has been 11 years of turmoil, unrest and political instability in the northern African country divided between rival governments in its east and west, all in the name of power struggle and wealth. The 11th anniversary comes as the country's transition to democracy has experienced ups and downs. The country missed elections in December 2021, slated by the United Nations in a bid to bring back peace to the North African nation. The country has been trapped in violence since a NATO-backed uprising toppled the leader. Today we will be discussing what has become of the North African nation 11 years after the overthrow and fall of Gaddafi. Stay with us. Hello ladies and gentlemen, thank you immensely for joining us once again over Voice It over 4U Media, where today we are discussing Libya. Of course, October 2011 was exactly 11 years to now when former leader of Libya passed on. He was overthrown and of course he died through a NATO-backed uprising that took place in the northern African nation. And today we are discussing 11 years afterwards, what has become of this northern African country that has been sunk into 11 years of turmoil, 11 years of unrest and 11 years of political instability. Of course, I will not be joined alone this afternoon. I'm equally joined by Professor Akumbo Mark Anthony. He is a political analyst as well as a Pan-Africanist. Good day, sir.
Thank you very much, Sharon, for the opportunity to intervene in your program. It is always a privilege when we have the opportunity to talk to Africans. I think in this program of today, I am actually going to take my time to explain one of the reasons why Gaddafi was killed and how the nation of Libya is today after his departure, or after his murder by the French and the Americans and the British under the banner of NATO. So we might think that the killing of Gaddafi had to do with the people of Libya, but that was propaganda that the West actually decided to put on air in order to target Gaddafi and kill. And that happened. Thank you very much.
Thank you immensely, sir, for taking our time to join us on today's edition. Before we get down to discussion and, of course, uncovering the circumstances or events that surrounded the overthrow and, of course, subsequent death of Muammar Gaddafi, we are going to first take a listen to this report compiled to us by the news desk of 4U Media Africa. Ladies and gentlemen, take a listen. October 20, 2011 to October 20, 2022, exactly 11 years since the ouster and fall of one of Africa's icons, Muammar Gaddafi, in Libya, one of the most prosperous countries in the African continent, thanks to its vast oil fields. Since his overthrow, it has been 11 years of turmoil, unrest and political instability. The North African country has divided between rival governments in the east and west and amongst multiple armed groups competing for quarters of power, control of the country and its wealth. The 11th anniversary of former Libya's leader, Colonel Muammar al-Gaddafi, comes as the country's transition to democracy is experiencing new pitfalls that raise fears of a resumption of hostilities. This is after the country undermined by the division from both parties since February 10, 2022, missed the December elections, which has been part of a United Nations-led peace process that some had hoped would help start a new and more peaceful chapter in Libya's history. The former Libyan president promoted social and economic development programs in his country that led the North African nation to be a regional leader on the Human Development Index in 2011. After the military intervention led by the North Atlantic Treaty Organization NATO to overthrow Colonel Muammar al-Gaddafi, Libya has been trapped in a spiral of violence involving armed groups, sectarian, ethnic groups, and external interference that has led to the country in absolute chaos. Gaddafi ruled Libya with an iconic feast for 42 years after 1969 coup against the monarchy, portraying himself as a revolutionary, Arab and African hero while crushing our opposition. Still remembered for various reasons, Colonel al-Gaddafi dreamed of a united Africa. 11 years on, we still ask the question if Libya can be whole again.
Exactly, today we are asking that question if Libya can definitely be whole again. For us, the first question I would like to ask you, Prof, this afternoon is, what do you remember of this iconic Libyan leader, Muammar Gaddafi?
Thank you very much, Sharon, for the opportunity again. I want to say that when we go back into the life of Gaddafi and his time in power, it is true that he actually ruled Libya with a fist, an iron, let's put it that way. But I think that building a nation is not a game of childishness. A nation that primarily was a monarchy, which he as an individual through the military overthrew the monarch and took over. He didn't claim that he was a president. He said he was the revolutionary leader. And for 40-something years, he held the nation under a fist. I remember that country had gone through sanctions from the US and Europe. They were under sanctions, but under these sanctions, they were excelling. We at times want to speak only of the good things that Gaddafi did, but Gaddafi was not an easy leader. But that is normal. I think if we have to compare Gaddafi today and look at the way George Walker Bush actually handled America and external countries, we'll see that George Walker Bush was worse than Gaddafi. If we want to look at what others did before Gaddafi, for example, we have Reagan, who will say they were worse than Gaddafi. And what about those who killed him? Obama and the former president of France, and Tony Blair, all those guys who felt on him. You asked me the question, what can I remember of him? One of the main things that Africans always remember about Gaddafi was the fact that he always had dreamed of a united Africa, where we have a single currency, no borders, one passport, and we are run like a nation of people from north, south, east to west. And that was a very powerful dream. Apart from that, he also had a beautiful idea which permits us today. I don't know if you sometime by then you were not born, if you can remember. There was a time when to make a call for a minute will cost you more than 1,000 francs for a minute. Why? Because France was the one that would permit us, for example, in Cameroon, to make a call through to the world. So if you have to call somebody across the globe, you have to go through France. The call goes to France before it's forwarded. Why? Because they were the ones giving us the satellite. And Gaddafi, as an individual, came up with the idea and said it's good that this idea of cost be limited. We should launch a satellite that will help Africans be able to make easy calls. And that he decided to provide half of the money for that particular launching of the satellite. But you know what? Most of the African leaders were unable to come up with the rest of the half, which actually was really disturbing because they never had a vision like the man had. He was a visionary. He still went ahead to add the money that he had actually already deposited half. Before others, I think Russia came in to deposit, I think 50% of, about 25% of it, and the rest of the leaders of Africa deposited the rest of the 25%. And that satellite was launched, and today you can make a call across Europe, across from Africa to Europe, and it will cost you not up to 50 francs. What had happened? That was a visionary. When he said Africa needed one currency, he was not joking. And I want to tell you that is why he died. Because he was struggling to take away food from the mouth of the United States. The US dollar is just a piece of paper that has been printed and is backed by the government. It has nothing that is backing it. It's just fiat currency, as we call it. But if you remember, back in 1971, President Nixon removed the gold standard that was backing the US dollar and allowed it to become a fiat. So it became a useless paper that can be printed at any moment by just the voice of the government. And so the US dollars became nothing, became just, and that is how any government can come and print as much as it wants, and inflation gets to increase and destroy the investment of persons. And so Gaddafi said, we were supposed to create a unique money for Africa. And he was ready to put gold, enough gold, to back that particular unique currency for Africa. And the Americans knew that their business would be destroyed. They worked with their allies to make sure that Gaddafi did not realize his dream. They came in and stole all the gold. And now we do not have visionary leaders again in Africa who can do that. If you see today, West Africa, the ECOWAS, even wanted to launch what we call the ECOWAS for the West African nations. And France came inside using Ivory Coast as a means to play down. So we do not have the kind of visionary leaders like Gaddafi who could say, okay, I'm going to single-handedly stand for this. Let's do this. We do not have them anymore. So even though the West told us he was a dictator, he was a repressive leader, you give him all the names they gave, but that is how, if you want to kill a dog, then you need to tap it and kill it. And that's what happened with him.
Thank you so much, Prof. Just to reiterate your Pan-Africanist, now would you say that Muammar Gaddafi is a true symbol of Pan-Africanism? Now when we're talking of Pan-Africanism, we're talking of his dream of a united Africa. We're talking about the Ubuntu perspective. Now, can you really say that he was a true symbol of Pan-Africanism?
I might not use the word symbol of Pan-Africanism based on, maybe I don't know what you mean by that, but I want to explain a bit about what Gaddafi stood for, was what our fathers, independent fathers, stood for. Don't forget that the dream of a united economy, a dream of an economic emancipation from imperial domination, was the dream of the Kwame Nkrumahs,
Yes.
who sat back in 1963 to create what we call the Organization of the African Union. That Organization of African Union was created with the intention of uniting Africa economically after the so-called political independence. They wanted economic independence for Africa. And so Gaddafi was not dreaming a dream which was not on the table by other African leaders. It was what the Organization of African Unity was created for, to emancipate Africa economically from imperial domination and from imperial hegemony. But like we know, most of those who sat for the creation of the Organization of African Unity actually had other agendas, and that is why even up to 2002, when the name of the organization was changed and replaced by what we call the African Union, sincerely, it never fulfilled the dream, because some individuals who were sitting for the so-called creation of that particular body never had the same vision like Kwame Nkrumah and the Moroccan body whom he was heading, because you had three facts that came to create what we call the Organization of African Unity, lobbied by the Imperial Majesty of Ethiopia by then Haile Selassie. And when these people sat down and created what they created, they had a vision. Gaddafi bought the vision. Gaddafi held the vision. And even though he is of an Arabic descent, he proved himself that he was a lover of the African people. And not only a lover of the African people, but because he was born in Africa, he also believed he was an African. And he was ready to fight for Africans, and he stood with Africans in every capacity. But he believed, like I also believe, that those of us with this black skin seems to have been cursed. In one way or the other, though we are not cursed, we have been so brainwashed and manipulated to an extent where we only see things from an egocentric position. We think only of what we can get and not what we can give. And that is why most of the leaders who were leading the other nations in Africa during his death never stood to defend him, because they were egocentric. They became allies with the US, with the foreigners, and decided to allow the invasion of foreigners into the African continent to kill Gaddafi. So if you ask me that question, what can I remember best of him, I will tell you he was a Pan-Africanist. He was a Pan-Africanist. I might not be able to use the words you have used, but one thing I am confident about is that he was a Pan-Africanist. And he stood his ground to make sure he proved himself as a Pan-Africanist, to give to Africans what Africans actually deserve in order to become a free people. But most of our leaders in Africa never stood for him, and they allowed him to be killed. Today, Libya, I think, is worse than when he was alive.
Yes. Definitely, that's so true. But then we are talking about 11 years of turmoil, unrest, and not to cite political instability. Now you've cited a lot of powerful points, foreign interference, which we shall be coming to later on. But then there is this popular adage that says you never know the value of what you have till you lose it. Now, as a Pan-Africanist, how true is this of Muammar Gaddafi?
You know, one of the things that a lot of persons do not understand about Gaddafi is the fact that this man, he had a very big heart. He dreamed what others did not dream. He saw the reality of a united Africa. He saw the reality of a dream realized where the African continent will be free. That nobody can take away from him. That nobody can take away from him. And please, I would like you to remind me of your question again, because I'm having some small distractions here.
Okay, so I was asking that looking at Libya today, 11 years since the overthrow and subsequent death of Muammar Gaddafi, we have this popular saying that you never know the value of what you have till you lose it. Now, Libya lost Muammar Gaddafi. Now we're 11 years on, nothing has really changed. The country has sunk more into crisis, from chaos to chaos. Now, how true is this of the former leader?
You see, like he said before he even died, trying to paraphrase him, he says, America wants to kill me so that they can have our oil. They are not killing him for the people of Libya. They wanted to kill him for the oil that Libya had, because I'll tell you, Libya is one of the smallest nations when it comes to population in Northern Africa, with over 6 million persons. But it had, and it still has, in fact, a very vast oil reserve. And America had always backed its dollar with oil. It had, you should know that. America made it clear that if you are to sell oil anywhere in the world, you have to use the dollar. And so oil became the backbone of what we call the US dollar. So getting to kill Gaddafi to get that oil, I think it was very, very necessary. So if Gaddafi told his people that killing me will not help you people get what they are telling you will get, if they listen to him, Libya would have been better than it is right now. And so, sure, the statement is a fact, which is being realized today in Libya, because the state of Libya right now is in chaos. If you can look at it, the state of Libya right now is in chaos. And Libya is, in fact, was supposed to be one of the most richest nations so far in Northern Africa, and why not Africa? Because of the vision that Gaddafi had for that particular nation. But unfortunately, as we are talking right now, he's not there to carry on that vision. And some greedy and egocentric individuals decided to align with the West to destroy the vision for the majority of 6 million persons who were standing behind Gaddafi. You know, it is true that some of the facts about the Libya under the reign of Gaddafi are exaggerated, but there are a lot of things that were true. In Libya, there was free education.
Yes.
I mean, not just for the primary school, there was free education. In Libya, there was free health, a free health system for the people. It is true those that have been brainwashed will tell you, oh yes, what kind of help do they have? The question you should be asking them is, who was he taking help from? That is the only nation before Gaddafi died. Gaddafi practically had no debt. That was the only nation in the world without debt. And that should tell you that he was leading his nation towards progress. It is true that the West magnified, lied to the world that Libya had 30% unemployment rate. That's a lie. For a person who instituted what we call the Green Revolution in order to push his people to get involved in agriculture, somebody who created a running river from nothing in his nation in order to establish agriculture. He transformed his nation from a desert into a forest. And you understand that? It became a green land instead of the desert that it was. That was the dream. Today you have a nation like Dubai, Qatar. Those were deserts in the 1960s that have been transformed into very high performing economies and running cities that are so exceptional from artificial means. That was the dream of Gaddafi for Libya. And he was on the path to transforming that nation to become one of the best. But what happened? Imperialists plotted against him, and he was not the only one. You know, I was listening to a video by one of I think George Bush's, I don't know if his advisor, whom he was actually exposing what Gaddafi, George Bush actually said before the invasion in Iraq. He had pinpointed those whom he was going to pull down. He was supposed to invade Iraq without any proof of mass weapons of destruction like the claim, gas and all that. He invaded and killed Saddam Hussein. He turned, the next target was supposed to be Syria.
Yes, yes, sir.
The finally did Syria, and the next was supposed to be Libya, which they targeted.
Yes.
So if you look at it, they had a very well hashed plan to destroy this Arab League that was existing, which I think Gaddafi was part of, to destabilize them because the guys were coming up strong. But unfortunately, Russia has been able to back Libya, Syria. That's why till now Syria is still fighting and still standing because Russia stood for them. Unfortunately for Gaddafi, he didn't have the support from Russia, neither from China, because NATO invaded Africa against international law, but nobody said anything against it. NATO, or let's say US, disguised with the so-called name of NATO, invaded Africa, broke international rules, and killed an African president, and nobody said anything about it, and nobody was judged for it. I think Obama was supposed to have been pulled to The Hague. I think Sarkozy was supposed to have been pulled to The Hague, and the then Prime Minister of Great Britain was supposed to have been pulled to The Hague for breaking international laws. When it comes to Africa, African leaders are pulled to The Hague. When it concerns those so-called big nations, nobody have the guts to touch them. I think that order needs to change, because this is not the war that we want. A war where Africans remain under slavery while Europeans are enjoying freedom. That is evil, and we have to fight it with our energy.
Okay.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you too, sir. You earlier mentioned foreign interference. Just to stay on that point, Western powers, as you earlier mentioned, they assisted through the NATO-backed uprising to overthrow Gaddafi. Now, looking at colonial masters, looking at foreign interference in Africa as a whole, why or how, what, I don't know how to explain, but how can Africa get to fight against this when it comes to resolving African matters?
You know, it is it is funny how today in the world we live in, Africa seems to be the underdog. If I may provide some statistics to you, Africa is the largest continent in the world. It is true that when you follow the visual map that these Europeans designed or drew for us, it makes us to think Africa is a kind of small, tiny continent. It is the largest continent when it comes to landscape.
Yes.
And when it comes to population, it is the second largest continent in the world. And creating a united African economy will means that we will be having a $3 trillion US economy, and apart from that, we are going to be having a vast market of 1.3 billion persons.
Yes.
That in itself is so wonderful, and that is what can give Africa dominance over the rest of the world. But they will not be allowed to do that if we keep on having foreign interference. When Europeans back in 1884 decided to come into Africa to colonize it, when they sat in their so-called tribal meeting in Berlin, which today they call it the Berlin Conference, decided upon themselves to break down Africa as a continent among themselves. They never consulted any Africa because they never saw Africans as a people. They looked at them as second-class citizens or children of a second-class God. And that is where we have a problem. And once they succeeded in breaking Africa among themselves, it became their personal properties. And a time came when they decided by themselves to create what, after they started fighting among themselves. You remember when Germany coordinated the meeting in Berlin in 1884, 1885, and they came into Africa claiming that they were colonizing, where they sent two persons to come and colonize a territory without the consent of the people, even using the barrel of the gun to intimidate them, to give their rights to them. It is shocking how today Africans have forgotten all these things. That is how they've started. I've even come to 1884. Back in the 16th century, when they came into Africa, enslaving Africans, stealing them and carrying them to the West to build their countries, to build their tribes. And today they claim that they are the rich tribes when those nations are standing strong on the back of our people, the free labor of our people, which today has not been paid back. And apart from that, after that, they decided to say, okay, let's stop slavery by themselves. We never intervened. They claimed that, okay, let's stop slavery. They came in with the idea of colonization. Let's divide these people among ourselves and keep them divided so that they can never rise again to become a great people. Not forgetting that Africa had led the world, gave the world civilization, and brought in a science that even till tomorrow, the West has no capacity to fathom how that civilization was established. They cannot even understand how the sciences which they use in establishing and building the great pyramids that we have right now standing in Egypt and part in Sudan are still standing. They do not understand how that science came into place. Some of them are struggling to fathom it, but it's not in their league to understand. So they decided to break Africa and keep them divided so that they will not. So that is how imperialism came. They developed the system which they call the white supremacy, which is what is now standing, and is the reason why Africa is where it is. And so their white supremacy has come through colonialism, and they came later on, they said they wanted to give independence, independence with strings attached to it. And if I remind you, today we have 14 African nations that were actually under the bondage and still under the bondage of France, whom France has refused to let go of these 14 African nations and still dictate to these African nations how their politics, how their economics policies are defined, and how they run their nations. And we claim that we are independent. We are not independent. Africa is not independent. And so this colonial arm, neo-colonial imperialistic demonic system that have been set to hold the African people down is so strong. Yes, but how can it be destroyed? That's the question you ask. How can the Africans get to the place where they can take over their continent and take over their economy? Is what, maybe I would not want to say it on TV, but I'm going to say it because they need to hear that Africans are rising. That is why today, if you enter a nation like Mali, the Malians decided to rise up on themselves and fight against. Today, if you go to Chad, Chad is burning right now. Even though Idriss Deby has decided to launch what we call the state of emergency, but that is not going to stop the Africans from rising against the French, who are struggling to hold Africa under bondage continuously. How can you imagine that France does not have wood, does not have equatorial forest, but France is the highest seller of timber? In fact, where
sir,
do they take timber?
Sorry to cut you short. Sorry to cut you short, but I really think we should just stay on Libya, so to say. So I think I'm going to divert the question, and this time I'll ask you, why do you think we have persistent instability in Libya?
Yeah, talking about Libya is very important, but we don't talk about Libya and forget Africa.
Yes, definitely.
Whatever is happening in Libya, as I mentioned, France, US, and Britain are the cause of it. And so there is no way we can talk about the happenings in that same country, Libya, without mentioning that France,
definitely,
which is
sir.
so terrible to African people. And so, focusing on the Libya you just mentioned, you realize that of recent, I think last year in December, there was need for them to actually establish what they call democratic government. I don't know what that means, but Africa does not need Western democracy in order to excel. That is why that so-called democracy did not hold, the election did not hold, because you can't bring in a faction of individuals with guns and claim that they can go for an election. And they are using their bulldog, what they call the United Nations, to foster their ideas. Democracy has failed in the United States, it will not succeed in Africa. Democracy had never been in Europe, so it will never succeed in Africa. When I say democracy had never succeeded in Europe, Britain, or say the United
Kingdom. Hello, sir.
Kingdom, any other European nations, for example, Spain, as a nation, is as we are talking right now, is a monarchy. Belgium is a monarchy. Switzerland is not a democracy. You can keep naming all those nations and you realize that these guys are very deceptive. They are struggling to implant what they do not have in their nations in Africa. Trying to make Libya become a democratic nation is not going to work. Libyans, for them to work together, they need a strong man as well as strong institutions to excel. So, if you want to ask me how Libya can become united again, for Libya to stand, it needs somebody like Gaddafi to pull those people together again before it will work. Because they have sown discord already within their spirits and given them arms to fight against themselves. I don't know whether they thought they were supposed to use the arms to fight. When you start fighting against yourself, you are a fool. And that is what we have been suffering as the people of Africa, and particularly in Libya, which we are talking about right now. That is why 11 years after they successfully killed Gaddafi, they have not been able to unite themselves. They have not been able to establish their so-called democracy. And so the NATO, the United Nations, need to be held to book for destroying a stable nation and struggling to create a system that will not even work and which will not keep the people united. Gaddafi successfully united the people and held them together. What has caused that nation to be where it is today? It is US, it is France, it is Great Britain, and the United Nations, which has been operating as their bulldog for a very long period of time. That is one of the bodies that was created, which has never succeeded, which was created particularly to unite Europe, was not created to unite the world. Thank you.
Thank you too, sir. Now, it's at this point that I would like to move from particular to general. Now, you earlier mentioned system of government. Gaddafi had a system of governance in his own country and it worked within his time, 42 years in power. Now, how can African leaders reshape what we call the system of governance so that it suits their various countries? Because we are at a point where we have issues coming up in different African nations. Now, in order to prevent such scenario, 11 years of unrest like what's happening or what happened in Libya, how can African leaders reshape this system of governance in their respective nations?
Thank you very much. I'll remind you that before the Westerners came into Africa, we have structured governments in Africa which were working for us.
Yes.
And the people had not capacity to rise up against their government because it was not in them.
Yes.
But they were taught by Europeans that they need to fight against their government. They were taught by Europeans that they need to establish a system that is so-called liberal, that permits the people to rule and run the nation. There is no nation, even in America, it is a selected few that nominate who becomes the president of that country. That's why you hear them, they call it colleges, they call it a college that actually sits together to vote who becomes the president. The states go out to vote, every state has a certain number of college who come back to vote the president. That's to make you understand it's not a popular vote, the popular vote that actually elects who becomes the president of that nation. And that is the thing that a lot of us in Africa do not know. It is deception that has been brought to Africa. So democracy had never worked anywhere in the world, so it's not going to work in Africa. And so ask me the question again, how do we as Africans establish systems
of governance
that actually permit us to rise as a united and a strong people towards the development of our continent? I will tell you, we need to go back to the ancient systems that were operating and working so well. I think that the British people established what they have, which they call constitutional monarchy, and it's working for them. Morocco in Africa is stable because it has a constitutional monarchy as well. We need such systems. We need to go back to a monarchical system which is controlled by, or say it is managed, the state is managed by the elected few, but governed and held together by a sovereign ruler who is the king. I am not a Democrat and I will never support democracy nowhere in the world. You see, when I talk, I know that a lot of persons ask the question, why should this guy hate democracy so much? The kind of democracy that imperialists brought to Africa was never a democracy that had worked anywhere. And that is why they have created a system which is crumbling. It has not been up to 200 to, let's say, 400 years, but the system is crumbling. That's not a system. We had systems in Africa. You had heard that there were pharaohs that ruled for over thousands of years. How can a civilization run for more than 1,000 years? That's to make you understand it was stable and was working. And that is the kind of system African leaders should go for. You might ask me, like in Cameroon, do I prefer Mr. Biya, who is the president, to stay in power for as long as he can? If you can stay in power and give to your people the necessary employment, give to your people the necessary facilities that permit them to live a life that is going to bring them to a place of development, then that kind of leader is needed. And that is what we want. So the only problem now might be that we have oligarchs who are sitting in power, who do not have their people in heart. They are puppets that have been put in power by these Western imperialists and defending the Western hegemony in Africa. These individuals we have presently sitting in most nations claiming to be African leaders are not African leaders. They might be of our skin folk, but they are not of our kin folk. If you understood what I said, they might be of our skin folk, but they are not of our kin folk. They might be black, but they are not our people because they are white inside their heads. And as a result of that, they are working for the slave master who is sitting in Europe and manipulating us through the puppet leaders. So we do not need puppet leaders in Africa. We need true leaders in Africa who are thinking for the good of the people of Africa, who are ready to die for the African people. Like we had John Pombe Magufuli of Tanzania, how he structured his nation and he was killed for it. Like we had a young man who rose up in the 1983s, like Thomas Sankara, and restructured his nation. We need people like J.J. Rawlings who rose up to re-establish and re-stabilize Ghana and make it to become what it is today. We need leaders who understand where we are going to, not puppets.
Thank you so much, sir. So now this question I would like to ask is, we all dream of a united Africa, a prosperous Africa, united currency, or one currency, if I may put it that way. Can all this still be achieved?
I think it can be achieved and it will be achieved. It is true that for a very long period of time, we have been the greatest problem to ourselves because we do have a lot of persons who are like us in skin color, but who are not working for us. That's the greatest deception that people can have. The imperialists have succeeded in establishing systems and individuals who fight against what we as a people do want. And as a result of that, when we are working, maybe when we come collectively to say, okay, let us build a system that is going to work for Africa, let's work for a united Africa, The same people who say they are working for United Africa are the same people dividing the Africa. And at the end of the day, we ask the question, how do we succeed with this kind of people? So I think in one way or the other, young Africans need to rise up like they are also already rising. If you saw what happened in Mali, if you saw what happened in Burkina Faso, if you saw what is happening right now in Chad, and I will tell you that rising is going to continue. It is a prophecy that I'm giving, because it is going to continue till we do not have imperial hegemony in Africa. We need to be free. The dream of economic emancipation of our continent from this imperial hegemony is going to be a reality, and our people are going to fight and take it. It is like it is said, there is nowhere where independence is given to a people, it is seized. It is our right to seize our independence. For a long period of time, we have been complaining, blaming and blaming. But I think it is time for Africans to take responsibility of their destinies. I think it is time for them to take responsibility of their continent and seize it from the hands of whosoever is a manipulator, seize it from the hands of whosoever is used, and seize it from the hands of those who have vowed that we will forever remain their farms. We choose to refuse that and choose to rise up to take our continent from the hands of this terrible group of persons whom the imperialists have placed in power. And we are announcing to the imperialists that it is time they realize that this continent is meant for the people of Africa. Africa belongs to Africans. It is not, I remind you again, it's not a farm. Allow what is in Africa for Africans. Give us the chance to choose to have a bilateral relation with you people. Don't impose on us how we should relate with you guys. They have established what they call the globalization in order to keep us permanently in our disaster, but we have chosen to build our continent, and so we are going to do it. And that to me is what I think as the African people, wheresoever we need to rise up to pick this thing from where it is right now. If we need to make a difference, then we have that choice right now.
Thank you so much, sir. Just to wrap up today's edition, I'd like to ask you this last question. Given what has happened to Libya, Libya has gone down. What can other African leaders learn from what is happening as we speak currently in Libya?
I think any African leader of right thinking should get to the place where they understand, and they should be able to hold it, that you don't abandon your brother in the midst of challenges.
Yes.
We must be able to stand for one another and stand for the continent of Africa if we are going to be respected as a people. You don't build a continent divided. You don't rise as single individuals, you rise as a people. That is the spirit of Ubuntu.
Yes.
We must work together. Go back to take what worked for our people. We must work together. The divided we stand, divided we fall. If we are divided, we will be scattered. But when we are united, we will make a strong people. The force of the African people is in their unity. And so it is very essential and important that we get to unite. We can't become a great people walking divided. That is why even till now, as we are talking, Europeans have united themselves under what we call the European Union, and they have a single currency for themselves. They have a single army which is working with the West, with America. The NATO is an army, and it's an army that they use to fight anyone that wants to stand against them. Africa needs a united front. We need to build a united military force. We need to build a united economy. We need to have the same currency, and we need to have a continent that is not run from a divided background. We can run our single nations, but under the African Union, we can have a strong government, a strong military, and a single currency and a single passport that permits Africans to move across Africa to fortify Africa. It is not going to happen if we keep on walking from a divisive position. So African leaders and the young ones that are rising, it is our time to walk, to build together, not to be divided. Libya was abandoned to itself. That is why today, 11 years after, it is divided. And those who abandoned it to be where it is today, I think some of them are still sitting in power today, and I'm sure they are listening to us right now. And so it is their responsibility to come together and build. I will take advantage of this opportunity and also announce that I am also the president of United Africa for Economic Empowerment, which is a Pan-African non-governmental organization with its headquarters in Cameroon. And we have a series of programs we do that are focused in helping unite our people. And United Africa for Economic Empowerment has as objective to unite Africans in the diaspora and at home. Not just Africans at home, but Africans in the diaspora. And these Africans in the diaspora are not just those who left Africa and went to Europe by their will. I'm talking of those whom were relocated through slavery and given different nationalities, like in the Caribbean, in the United States, in Europe, and wheresoever they are in the world. We want our people to be united. So that's one of our main objectives. And we have an annual event which we organize every year to gather Africans together so that we reason together. And this year is going to be happening in Cameroon from the 30th of November to the 4th of December. It is called Panafest International Cultural Expo and Festival, which is going to be featuring 4 main events. We have a business symposium and networking, which we are going to be organizing. And we have a fashion show, which will be to display the various outfits that Africans have as a diverse people. And apart from that, that event is going to be having a cultural manifestation to show the Africans how colorful they are and what Africans across the globe they have. And we should support it. And there's going to be a Panafest award. There's an international award where we'll be encouraging and awarding Africans who have, for the past years, been able to do something unique for the African people. So those are events and programs that we established to help unite our people. And we expect that the people should get to our website and begin to register to participate in the event. You can contact us individually. You can get to us through our website. Our website, you have UNAFWE.org as www.unafwe.org, UNAFE.org. So with that, you can get to us directly, and we'll be able to help you to know that Africa has a plan. We are working together to unite our continent, and that we are doing in different ranks.
Exactly, sir. You said divided we stand, divided we fall. I like to say
united we stand, united we stand, and divided we fall.
Thank you for the correction. United we stand, divided we fall. Thank you so much, Professor Akumo Mark Anthony. Just to reiterate, you are a Pan-Africanist and a political analyst. Join us all the way here from Cameroon. Thank you, Mercy, for taking our time to join us on today's edition.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. I have a blessed program. And I want to extend my greetings to Africans that are watching us right now. and particularly to my family here in Cameroon. Thank you very much for the opportunity.
Thank you too. Ladies and gentlemen, if you have noticed, we have come to the end of today's edition of Voice Seed over your Pan-African channel, 4U Media Africa. Today we're discussing the overthrow and possible the death of Muammar Gaddafi of Libya. 11 years on, the country still stayed in turmoil, unrest and political instability. I believe you learned a lot from today's edition. Stay in company of our programs that will be coming up next. I've been Jakes Nabuse for presentation. Bye-bye.